I see a large part of the journey of reconciliation being about a journey of healing. And that journey of healing is something that we all have to do together here in Canada.
Tonight, more money to help in searches for unmarked graves at former residential schools.
Il y a différentes versions. Tu sais, tu as la version de la famille, tu as la version des policiers. Je sais pas sur quelle information qui devrait être conclue, véridique ou,
Plus, a quiet Quebec community experiences a dramatic shooting.
If our youth are knowledgeable about who they are, and they're sharing that, and they're proud of that, and they're sharing that with outside visitors, that's the best way to pass on that knowledge to them.
And Indigenous tourism gets a boost in Ontario. Good evening and welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. The Squamish Nation announced that they are starting a search at the former St. Paul's Indian Residential School in North Vancouver, BC. Former residential school survivors, along with leaders and community members, gathered where the St. Paul's Residential School once stood. Today, it's a parking lot for the St. Edmunds Elementary School. The Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations were present alongside the Catholic Archdiocese. The investigations will look at who attended the school, what happened there, and find those students who did not come home. They will also be looking for unmarked burial sites. Phil Salem is a spokesperson for the Squamish Nation.
Today's announcement is about the beginning of an investigation to find answers around the children who attended St. Paul's Indian Residential School but never made it home. St. Paul's Indian Residential School was located next to the Squamish Nation's community of Uslahan. Many Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh children attended along with Indigenous peoples from other communities. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission issued two specific calls to action which must be implemented at the St. Paul's Indian Residential School site. Number 75, we call upon the federal government to work with provincial, territorial, municipal governments, churches, Aboriginal communities, former residential school students, current landowners, to develop and implement strategies and procedures for the ongoing identification, documentation, maintenance, commemoration, and protection of residential school cemeteries or other sites at which residential school children were buried.
Ottawa is beefing up the funding for researching and locating burial sites. $83 million will be added to the $33.8 million already committed. The funding will also go to commemorate and memorialize children who died at residential schools. Hundreds of unmarked graves have been found in the last few months, with many more communities wanting to do their own searches. National Chief Roseanne Archibald calls it a crime scene and the residential school experience a genocide, but is willing to work with the federal government.
I see a large part of the journey of reconciliation being about a journey of healing. And that journey of healing is something that we all have to do together here in Canada. And so it is becoming very evident that crimes were committed. We are saying that those crimes have to be investigated. And we believe that this announcement today is the first step on walking that road together.
New research out of Alberta has found private donations fueled the rise of residential schools in Canada. Tiffany Preet is a doctor of philosophy and University of Calgary researcher. She is also a member of the Kainai Nation, or Blood Tribe First Nation. She joins me now. Hi Tiffany, thanks for joining us. Tell us about the research you found uncovering this link between private donations and residential schools.
Sure. I'm doing research looking into my people, the Blood Tribe's historical past with colonization. And so I've been taking a look at the residential school era and the other school models that the Canadian government used to try and assimilate Indigenous children. So I've been doing research, traveling across Canada to take a look at multiple museums and archives to find primary and secondary documents that were written by the Canadian government and the different government officials and the different religions who ran residential schools, including the other schools on on the Blood Reserve to read about what has happened to my people. And I found a document from the Anglican Church where they had put out a report on how what they called Indian missions. And so they would put a report out every year about how their Indian missions were going. And it was to kind of try and entice different citizens from Canada and around the globe to try and to donate to the Anglican Church to be able to help raise funds for the schools to be maintained and continue to run those schools.
So, Tiffany, how did it fit into the missionary work these churches thought they were doing?
Well, when they first started to open up schools, the Canadian government wasn't paying everything that needed to be financed at that time to run schools. And so the Canadian government, depending on what time of the era that they were in, would only be able to provide a certain amount of money. And so the churches needed to be able to find a way to make up the difference to be able to run those schools. And so what I found for the Anglican Church was they would use these reports, kind of a pamphlet that they would hand out to try and make up that difference. And so they would talk about the different missions that they had. So this is specific to my people who were part of the Calgary diocese. And so they would talk about how the mission was going, how many children were being baptized, how education was moving forward. You know, it was to try and put the mission in a very positive light. And to let people know what kind of donations that they needed. And then it would be up to the citizens to decide if they were going to donate to the church or to a specific mission. And they had a donation card within the report as well for people to fill out and to send back to the diocese.
So, Tiffany, you've called for the churches to release the records. How would that help?
You know, it's really hard as I have been traveling across Canada to try and find my people's records. It's not in just one place, and it's been incredibly difficult. I might find some files from the 1800s in one archives, from the 1930s in a different archive, in the 1950s in a completely different archive. So it's literally scattered across Canada, and it makes it really hard to be able to try and find records. And some of the records are restricted, and so I'm not able to access all of the history about my people. And it would be really nice to be able to take a look at those records to know what happened to my ancestors and to my people. And so without being able to have access to those documents, it makes it really hard to understand what has happened. And I don't understand why those records need to be restricted, particularly members of the tribe that are coming to look at those records.
All right, Tiffany, we'll have to leave it there. I want to thank you again for taking a few minutes to speak with us today.
Yes, thank you for the invitation.
Yesterday marked the 5-year anniversary of Colton Bushy's death. Bushy was shot by a Saskatchewan farmer after a vehicle the 22-year-old was riding in went onto his property. Bushy's family held a news conference to mark the anniversary and to keep pushing for justice. APTN's Priscilla Wolf has the story.
Today, I hope and pray for change within the justice system. This racism should not be in the justice system. Discrimination don't belong there either.
Colton Bushy's mother, Debbie Baptiste, doesn't want people to forget her son and how Canada's justice system failed him and her family.
He deserved a life. He had dreams, and they were cut short. So today I'd like for everybody to remember Colton. He was a victim, not a criminal.
Lawyer Eleanor Sunchild says the family will not accept the acquittal of Gerald Stanley for shooting and killing Colton Bushy in 2016. Sunchild says the Civilian Review and Complaints Commission found the RCMP racially discriminated against Baptiste when they were investigating his death.
CRCC made a finding that the RCMP discriminated against Debbie Baptiste the night her son was killed. And that's a welcome finding, but it should be the first of many findings in this case.
That's why they want the RCMP investigated further.
We still push for a full inquiry, a full public inquiry into what happened after the killing of Colton Boushie, not just including how the RCMP handled the case, but as time goes on, more is revealed. For example, the CRCC found that the communications between the officers on the day Colton was killed had been erased.
Alvin Baptiste, Colton's uncle, says Canada's justice system failed Colton, and the family will keep advocating for a public inquiry and more.
We've been waiting. We've been waiting for an inquiry. We haven't gotten that. We've also been waiting for the United Nations, the rapporteur, to be invited into Canada to do an investigation on the justice system.
Priscilla Wolfe, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
Embattled Manitoba Premier Brian Pallister announced today he is stepping aside midterm so the Progressive Conservatives can find a new leader before the next provincial election in 2 years. He made the announcement outside a caucus retreat being held in Brandon, Manitoba today. He had previously said he wasn't going to run for a third term. This announcement confirmed that, but he stopped short of saying when exactly he would leave office. Pallister had been plagued by low approval ratings in his second term and most recently was under heavy fire even within his own caucus for making historically inaccurate and insensitive comments about settlers and residential schools. Pallister called his time in office scandal-free and took no questions from media after making his statement.
From the very beginning, there's a better time than now for me to step aside. So I make that decision today. I believe both decisions are the right ones, then and now. Now it's time to move on and spend some time with the people that I have missed over many years, including my family and friends.
We want to hear what you think about Pallister announcing he will not be seeking re-election. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca or leave a comment on aptnnews.ca. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok. Follow APTN News to join the conversation and see our latest stories. All right, we have to take a short break, but still to come, more protesters arrested in BC over the cutting of an old-growth forest. Welcome back. Provincial police officers recently shot an Anishinaabe man from Kitsisakik, Quebec during a heated intervention. The chief of Kitsisakik says he's heard several versions of the story, but details regarding the incident remain unclear. Here's the story from Chouchon Bécon, translated and read by Lindsay Richardson.
Kitsisakik is a small, wooded Anishinaabe community of 483 members. Though normally quiet, the community recently experienced a dramatic incident, forcing 33-year-old Matt Swain Gunn to be hospitalized 2 hours away in Val-d'Or. Quebec's police watchdog, the Bureau des Enquêtes Indépendantes, is investigating the circumstances of the police intervention which sent Gunn to hospital. According to the BEI, Gunn was struck by at least 2 police bullets after allegedly uttering threats and trying to force his way into a woman's home.
Il y a différentes versions. Tu sais, tu as la version de la famille, tu as la version des policiers. Je sais pas sur quelle information qui devrait être conclue, véridique ou,
Régis Penasway, chief of Kitsisakik, says the community is pushing for the truth, especially considering some Sûreté de Québec officers are now equipped with body-worn cameras as part of a pilot project in the region.
C'est quand même des choses qui, pour moi, ça pourrait atténuer ou plus avoir une meilleure version.
According to the SQ, the body cam trial run in the Val-d'Or region is expected to last 6 months, with strict protocols to follow concerning their use.
La caméra va être activée lorsqu'il fait une interpellation policière, c'est-à-dire quand le policier va être en action auprès d'une personne qui est dans le besoin, exemple, il va activer sa caméra, va tenter d'avoir les informations, il va annuler sa caméra par la suite. Elle va aussi être activée lorsque le policier va retirer son arme à feu de son étui ou le pistolet taser. Ça va se faire de façon automatique.
Richard says there are 4 sectors in Quebec now testing out body-worn cameras. 10 officers per sector are equipped with them.
Les policiers l'utilisent déjà et ça fait déjà partie des choses, des documents qui vont être transmis autant au niveau là, de suivi judiciaire que ça peut être dans d'autres suivis. Il ne faut pas se leurrer, dès que le policier va avoir cette caméra-là sur lui, qu'elle va enregistrer, ce document-là peut servir de preuve dans toutes les instances judiciaires qui suivent.
Matt Swain Gunn survived his injuries and was eventually released from hospital. He remains in police custody. During a recent hearing at the Val-d'Or courthouse, he was charged with assaulting 2 women and 3 officers of the peace. But the case is not so open and shut for the people of Kitsisakik. They say they'll keep pushing for a fair assessment of what really happened on the night of August 1st. A story by Shashan Bacon, APTN National News, Montreal.
On Vancouver Island, over 30 protesters were arrested in the dispute over cutting an old-growth forest. In total, over 500 arrests have been made, most for breaching an injunction allowing logging company Teal Jones to operate. The group behind the protests say they want permanent protection of the area. APTN's Lee Wilson has the details.
Guys, to stand back, please. So, the exclusion zone's going into effect now.
RCMP arrived in military fatigues on ATVs, telling the protesters on the logging road near Port Renfrew that the injunction would be enforced. According to a police press release, 33 people arrested yesterday at 2 camps. Rainforest Flying Squad spokesperson Saul Arbes said the original camp, set up a year ago, was raided. He said arrests are still taking place today.
At the same time, yesterday, they raided Helicamp. Now, Helicamp is one of the camps up near the rim of Fairy Creek watershed proper, has a deferral upon it for the remainder of the 2 years when it was established.
On April 1st, Teal Jones was granted an injunction to operate in the Fairy Creek area. Police enforcement started in mid-May with an injunction zone. As of Monday, over 550 arrests were made, mostly breach of injunction or obstruction of justice. According to an RCMP press release, enforcement took place as vehicles, tents, and trenches were blocking the roadway, hindering loggers, and as well as the police. The use of vehicles to block the roadways is not only a breach of the court-ordered injunction, but creates serious difficulties for the local fire department to access the roadway in the event of a forest fire. The protests include non-Indigenous and Indigenous supporters, but the Rainforest Flying Squad stated the months of arrests on Vancouver Island that certain people are being targeted.
Now I can say consistently the police have targeted Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC people when they are doing arrests, and in particular Indigenous youth.
We reached out to the RCMP, but did not get an interview or a statement before airtime. In June, a 2-year deferral of old-growth logging was put in place on Fairy Creek in the Carmana-Walbrand regions. After a request was made by 3 First Nations, including Pacheedaht First Nation, Fairy Creek falls in their traditional territory. The protests remained, and now call for permanent protection of all old growth in the area. After a year of requests to the BC government, the Rainforest Flying Squad say they still have not had any conversation with the province. They plan to stay, but are reaching out to Pacheedaht First Nation in hopes of ending this dispute peacefully.
And we're reaching out now and trying to bring that to some kind of an agreement that will allow us to leave, but will also have led to some the protection of those areas that we have been defending all this time.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Kitimat.
With a likely federal election call combined with the Nunavut territorial election scheduled for October, those 2 events are causing some political turnover in Nunavut. Our Kent Driscoll joins us from Iqaluit. Kent, just how many people are changing jobs?
Thanks. And as for how many, there are a few. But the really interesting thing here is the high-profile positions some people are giving up. Nunavut's MPP, Mumila Kakak, of the NDP, has announced she will not be running in the next election. The NDP in Nunavut met last night to decide their Nunavut candidate. They have 2 to choose from: a Iqaluit-based lawyer and entrepreneur, Lori Idlout, and Alika Ilauk, a student and consultant based in Gatineau, Quebec. They haven't announced a result yet. Over at the Legislative Assembly, former Premier and now former Speaker Paul Quassa has resigned. He says it's to make way for a younger candidate in the upcoming territorial election. But there's plenty of speculation he may be looking at that federal seat. And finally, PJ Akiokok was president of the Kikitani Inuit Association. That's Baffin Island's regional Inuit association. He just announced his resignation and has said he is going to be running for the territorial assembly. Back to you in Winnipeg.
All right, thanks for that, Kent. We need to step aside for one final break, but still ahead, Indigenous tourism is getting a boost in Ontario. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. Myrna Blacksmith shared this shot of her son Dalton fighting a fire in Whiteshell Provincial Park in Manitoba. Well, that's a powerful shot there. If you want us to share your pictures, send them to share@aptn.ca along with the location and story behind the picture. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Beginning in the east, 27 and a mix of sun and cloud in Charlottetown and 26 in Fredericton. 15 degrees and a mix of sun and cloud in Nain and 25 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 26 and rain in Quebec City and 26 and rain in Val d'Or. Rain and 27 in Sarnia and 22 in rain in North Bay. 17 in rain in Big Trout Lake and 22 in rain in Sioux Lookout. 20 in rain in Thompson and 19 in The Pas. 26 in sun in Brandon and 24 in Winnipeg. A mix of sun and cloud and 20 in Regina and 26 in Estevan. 13 in rain in Stony Rapids and 16 in rain in Uranium City. More rain over in the west, 17 in rain in Fort McMurray and 20 in rain in High Level. Rain and 23 in Red Deer and a mix of sun and cloud and 24 in Edmonton. Sunshine and 25 in Vancouver and 28 in Bella Coola. A mix of sun and cloud and 22 in Fort Nelson and 26 in sun in Smithers. Rain and 19 in Dawson and rain and 15 in Rock River. Raining and 21 in Wrigley and 17 in rain in Norman Wells. A mix of sun and cloud and 20 in Fort McPherson and 15 in Colville Lake. Rain and 13 in Baker Lake and 10 degrees in Chesterfield. 5 degrees in rain in Resolute and 6 degrees in rain in Arctic Bay. Indigenous tourism in Ontario is stepping up its game with a new program that aims to bring together Indigenous food and Ontario's identity. Feast, a program aimed at growing Indigenous food tourism, is the first of its kind in Canada and says Indigenous foodways should be an integral part of the visiting journey in Canada. It was 2 years in the making and has a 5-year plan to improve the Indigenous food tourism sector and bring more dialogue and awareness to Indigenous culture. Kevin Eshkokagan is the president and CEO of Indigenous Tourism Ontario. He says it's about making connections.
If our youth are knowledgeable about who they are and they're sharing that and they're proud of that and they're sharing that with outside visitors, that's the best way to pass on that knowledge to then their children in the future. And it's something truly, memorable to be a part of. And it's something that's really, really fun to see our people growing and sharing who they are with people from all around the world.
All right, that's going to do it for this Tuesday edition of APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. I'm Daryl Stranger. Have a great night.